Ladies and gentlemen, this talk is about very unusual effect, and despite this effect has multiple replication studies with good statistics. There are multiple publications and even scientific publication in such high-level journals like Nature, but nevertheless we have only a little understanding about its internal mechanism, structures and dependencies. The name of this effect is the phantom effect, and this talk is about several hypotheses and experimental evidences. The talk consists of two parts. In the first part, I will try to give some overview about different, at least 6 different appearances and frameworks and methodologies. And in the second part, I will show technology for measurements and some attempts to integrate this effect in some sort of experimental devices and experimental methodology. The most famous example of the phantom effect is the phantom leaf. This phenomena was first discovered in Soviet Union by 2 different group of researchers, and in fact not by Kirlian itself. And the first publication was done in a popular journal, not in scientific journal, Technika Молодежи by Adamchenko and Velenskaya. But probably this missing explanation somehow stopped the further exploration, at least in the scientific community. And the first successful replication in 1979 by a group of researchers from India. This replication attempt opens the way for more broader exploration in Western, first by academic community and then by a group of more, let's say, broader communities by different peoples. And the peak of popularity I can probably approximate to 90s of the last century. But nevertheless, successful replication, the last successful replication was done in 2015, to my knowledge. There was with about 140 different samples, and the outcome was positive. So this effect is related to Kirlianography and to this coronal discharge, this visible appearance of some structure in high-frequency electromagnetic field. And as we know, there are some illumination of boundaries and some internal structures. And here in this case, if a part of this leaf is cut out, so this missing part is still visible on Kirlianography, but only under specific conditions. Not in all cases. And this missing explanation that probably drives the whole development in the direction of more esoteric and paranormal explanation, like out of body experience and this after death stuff. And this finally generate a kind of scientific skepticism. And many people say, well, what we see here is metabolic products, and they spread out here in this place. And what we in fact see, we see this illumination of these fluid metabolic products. But this critic point cannot be really accepted, because we cut in one position, but we see here the whole structure, and in fact with these fine substructures. There are multiple attempts, for instance, to replicate this in different conditions to improve the original experiment. For instance, pieces inside of the leaf in different configuration that was cut out, and after this we still see the fine structures, and even there was attempt to replace a high-frequency electromagnetic field by chemoluminescence. And this piece with some cut out parts was placed between photosensitive materials, and after a while, after a couple of days, this structure, this leaf with this cut out parts was printed in this photosensitive materials. So in general, like I say, this effect was replicated a number of times with positive outcomes. It's really appear under specific condition, not in all cases, but under specific conditions. And nevertheless, after all these attempts and after more than probably 60 years of exploration, we still do not have any, let's say, more deeper understanding about its origin. The second manifestation of the phantom effect is known as a memory effect. It's appear in specific locations, and probably the first time it was discovered by Kozyrev in Soviet Union, again in 60s. And Kozyrev, one of his, let's say, hobbies was exploration of sky for a through position of stars. And he believed that exactly from this through position is coming some sort of energetic flow. It has optical and electrical properties. And if this flow is focused on optical way to set up, he was able to observe physical changes. And his measurement device was used kind of resistive elements or resistive bridge. And if this telescope was scanning a sky for the through position of stars, exactly in this position, Kozyrev was observing a strong variation of resistivity of this element. I should say this experiment was replicated multiple number of times. One of the really famous replication was done in Academy of Science by some people from the Academy, and they fully confirmed this conclusion from Kozyrev. But return to this memory effect. The Kozyrev itself call it as a kind of accumulation of influences. So this energetic flow that stick to specific places of experimental setup and still influence all these elements, the sensitive elements, even if the telescope was moved away from a true position of sky. And the more experiments Kozyrev was performing, the more stronger was this effect. It's really kind of accumulation of these influences. And this memory effect, if there are no experiments, this slowly disappear, and after a while, in fact, there was no memory effect at all. Let's say this memory effect is extremely unpleasant phenomena. Almost all researchers they meet it, even in our group and other modern researchers, they also well known this phenomena. In the presentation, I will show a few examples, and here only a short mentioning that probably there was also this effect involved in the measurement. There is very famous replication of, again, very famous replication of Montagnier effect with transduction of DNA in a low frequency electromagnetic field. This replication was done in the laboratory in China, in Langfang, and more or less the idea that buffer or water was come in the with DNA sample was placed in the chamber with a low frequency electromagnetic field, and PCR test was exploring experimental samples from this chamber as well as control samples from these fluids, from original fluids, and all that experiments was performed in the same places. And of interest is the fact that control samples, the PCR test, also discovered traces of DNA in control samples. And there was no contamination, of course, also in this place, but there's still a missing explanation why control samples they show this remainings of DNA traces. And one of explanation was exactly because of this memory effect. So performing experiment in the same places, they accumulate this effect of influence, this memory effect, this phantom effect, and this phantom effect affect in fact control samples. So it sounds crazy, of course, but later on I will also demonstrate a few examples in our experiments and by experiments in different groups about this effect. Interesting variation of memory effect is related to rotating physical bodies. This is not my first time that I'm giving the talk about the phantom effect, and every time I receive new and new feedback about new and new appearances of that phenomena. And this slide was suggested by a public discussion, by people in this public discussion. They say, hi, look, there is some strange phenomena from rotating body which has a similar phenomenology. And indeed, I found a number of publications. They related to probably end of 80s, 90s, beginning of 2000s. And if also in these setups, people rotated different bodies, like from this conic bodies and others. And there are two phenomena to note. As the first, it seems this rotating body, they are able to put some physical influences on material. For instance, films, photographic films, they had some traces, the physical traces that remain from this rotation. And the second effect, this is appearance of some visual effects that can be taken in the photographic way. And for instance, these images, there was remaining even after this rotating body was stopped. So this remained for a while, and after this, so this effect disappeared. So we see here a clear correlation to the memory effect, what I was mentioning before. The next group of appearances of the phantom effect is related to shapes and geometries. And it has a close relationship to the previous effect of spatial memory. If you remember Kozyrev definition, Kozyrev says that this effect is very similar to accumulation of influence in specific places. So it's a kind of flow. It has electrical and optical properties, and this flow in fact move and propagate on the surfaces. So we can assume if this flow meet edges, sharp edges, some boundary structures, it will emit like optical properties emit to other objects and or emit in the space. And this effect, this shape effect, is quite well known. Primarily for different pyramids, but also other experiment demonstrated quite well. This is a Radiuk experiment. He used colloidal solution made from organic remains from plants. There was plants was cut to very small pieces, very small particles, and this colloidal solution demonstrated different rate of sedimentation in presence of geometries, in fact of any geometries. He demonstrated with glass, metal, wood, stone, almost all possible materials. And what is of really interest, if the structure is removed from this place, so we still observe a different rate of sedimentation in this place. So, of course, this shape effect is observed in many places and many structures in nature. And, of course, people try to reuse the effect in some practical cases for practical usages. And it was observed in large and small architectural structures. And this effect is really well known by researchers. And in radionics and psychotronics and torsionics, this effect is really heavily used because there's the simplest way to amplify this emission, to put this emission, to transfer it, for instance, by wires. So I will show later some examples of utilization of the shape effect. The fourth group of phantom effects is capturing by imaging and by photography, and is commonly related to so-called throughgraphy. The idea is here that by using some techniques, people were able to capture mental images and mental pictures from some people. I let's say took 4 examples. There is actually more examples. By 4 examples. The first one is Gennady Krokholev. he was quite famous in this field. There are groups that even now try to follow this approach. So his idea was, in fact, to took some pictures that are coming from human eyes. But of course here the question is whether operator also generates something in eyes or it's directly also influence the photographic lenses, like is done in radionics, what I will show in the next slide. But nevertheless, I mean, this picture that was done in this way are really impressive. And in fact, people who describe this, they say, okay, whatever I'm thinking, this object or this imagination was appeared in as a photographic image. And some examples, and I do not see how this image can be, I mean, can appear in random way by choice. This thoughtography was not only, I mean, done in Soviet Union. Quite well known as groups of I mean, people who follow this approach in Japan. I found even in Wikipedia some examples of this, I mean, of this thoughtography. But also there are still now also quite known works of TED series and other researchers. The thoughtography is also known in radionics, but under different name as radionic imaging or radionic photos. I took two examples, again, as Ruth Drown and George Delavore. Both are extremely famous in radionic, and exactly because of this, in fact, imaging. How Ruth, for instance, described this process. She was focusing on human patient, on specific section of the patient body, and by using this radionic device with multiple buttons, it seems this device was really facilitating production of these images. So she was able to put on the photographic film some specific section of human body. In the same way, George Delavore, he was also focusing on specific sections and using the different radionic device, but also with multiple buttons. He was able to demonstrate these images, and I'm not sure these images can be also I mean, obtained in modern rentgenography because of this very specific section. And even there was also quite known this to some extent strange images of 3-month-old embryons, also human embryons. So these four examples, also from Krokalev, TED series, Ruth Drown, and Delavore, they demonstrate, also first of all, that the phantom effect has a relationship to human mental capabilities, because people was able to produce it in mental way and to capture it by imaging. And exactly because of this imaging techniques, also there are multiple images available, and we know this effect in fact exists. It's not a kind of let's say speculative speculation. And this demonstrates again this some specific features of this phantom effect. The fifth group of effects related to phantoms is created by so-called light phenomena. There are different light phenomena. There is just a light of different shapes and different sizes, and then sometimes they move, sometimes they stop, sometimes they have a kind of some blurred effects. And I was originally skeptic to this, I mean, because you know, if you put some lights in front of your camera and move a little bit as fast, then you will see something like a blurred light movement. But finally, if I learned more about light effect and specific geographic location, then I was a little bit more, let's say, convinced about the existence of this phenomena. And one of the most famous and most interesting descriptions related to Hessdalen light in the Valley of Hessdalen. If somebody don't know, please read it. Even in Wikipedia, there's a beautiful description. And the point is that this light, as such light, appears periodically in this location, as it's quite small region, and they have sometimes more intensive appearance. Sometimes this effect disappears for a while, and in the modern time, intensification was in 30s and then in 80s. And after 80s, researcher even installed in this region some automatic registration station. There is a kind of collaboration with local university, and up to now, I don't know, it's about 50 years of research. And what this researcher write, okay, fine, we can really confirm this effect exists. There are thousands of confirmation, there are thousands of images of description. And finally, their success is they are able to classify this phenomena by their movement patterns and by geometries. So finally, we know that this exists, but finally we don't know what it is, what kind of structure, what kind of appearance this is. So from this point of view, at least I think this light phenomena to some extent belong to the phantom effect, because of very similar appearance. It's also strongly related to geometric region, to some specific place, but it seems in this case this probably has also some additional qualities and some additional capabilities. Last group of effects in the phantom context has esoteric dimension. I call it mystic implants and immortality. And basically the topic of immortality should be taken seriously because of Google, Microsoft and other companies who invest now a lot of money. They really look for immortality, for extending human life, for solving this aging problem. And it seems here, at least the idea is also quite closely related to previous topic of thoughtography and radionic photography, where people, by focusing mental effort, are able to produce some structures, as of course invisible structures, but they can be captured by photographic films, and so they become visible. So in this case, these structures, they are placed inside of the human body. So we can really consider this as an implant, also the mental implant. And there is a lot of publication now. I will show them later in the presentation. They claim that these implants they have a strong influence on different human systems, like metabolism, like thermal regulation, like homeostasis, like immune systems. Here are important, at least there is a lot of techniques that describe the way how to put this implant of human body. They are even known from really old cultures. And in this implant, important is, first of all, exact place where a human operator should focus to install this implant. Second, as a functionality, there is a very detailed description how to achieve it. For instance, some techniques, the 6 yoga of Naropa, that describe it also quite in detail. And finally, operator should do it a long time to maintain this functionality. So, and it seems, I mean, following this publication, seems this effect is real. Extension of this effect is another way of achieving immortality. And it seems that people, by focusing, are able to, first of all, to generate this structure inside of human body, to transmit human consciousness inside, and they put it outside. And so the human, they live in fact in the kind of the structure outside, and this way is described as the way for achieving immortality. So at least this esoteric dimension is anyway worth for further investigation. And indeed, so there is already some investigation started, so from both ways, from implants and from immortality. And in fact, so this one of the interesting, also one of the most interesting topics of the phantoms. Now we try to conclude the first introductory part. It seems one of the most important feature of phantom is their localization to specific positions in the setup or experimental samples. Secondly, phantoms are produced by different experimental processes, by physical interaction, by electromagnetic phenomena, and even the process that generates the phantom is finished, the phantom still exists. It has a kind of memory effect, and phantoms, they disappear after a while. So lastly, we see multiple examples when phantoms has a strong relationship to biological object, and especially to human consciousness. And to some extent, phantoms can be generated by human consciousness, so operators are able to produce this effect. In the next presentation, in the next part of this presentation, I will focus on experimental approaches in the way how to measure it and how to produce it. And in fact, I split this presentation to two dedicated points. In the first, we will discuss more about technological aspects in the way how to create hybrid phantom technology devices. And the second dedicated point, we call it a programmable phantom effect, how to use operators, the capability of operators to generate phantoms with a specific functionality, and also use this effect, for instance, for implants, so this phantom implants, and I will show some modern research on this issue. The first important question is how to measure this kind of phenomena. We had a hypothesis that phantom effect can represent a kind of weak interaction, for instance, interaction taking place on quantum level, and we can sense it as we sense other weak phenomena, like weak biophysical phenomena. We used in this case electrochemical equipment, high resolution pH measurement with a resolution up to 10 of power minus 6. At this resolution we need a good thermal stabilization and shielding against electromagnetic emission. It is done in these measurement towers. And the measurement start a couple of days before for this background measurement, and then we inserted fresh leaf. And here is important to understand that a distance between leaf and this measurement container is about 4-5 centimeters. So we are measuring not a direct interaction, this is a distant interaction, and this is interaction not with biological object, but with some, let's call it subtle structure behind this sleeve. So, and this subtle structure interact distantly with samples and change a trend of electrochemical reactions. So after we inserted this leaf under this measurement tower, 4-5 hours after this trend of electrochemical degradation changed, and 2 or 3 days after, if we remove this leaf, we observed again a change of electrochemical degradation. If we leave this process further, we observe a slow return to initial trend of degradation. So in this case, we see a clear correlation between insertion and removal of the sleeve, and we also see a memory effect. And so we think that our hypothesis is confirmed, that phantom effect probably represent a kind of interaction, and it can be sensed in the way of sensing weak biophysical interaction, by electromagnetic, by optical, by any other equipment. I would like to demonstrate the optical way of measuring the phantom effect by a really nice experiment performed by the Persinger group, published about 10 years ago, and is based on chemoluminescence. I already mentioned this approach in the phantom leaf, where it was printed in photosensitive material. Here, at least from the idea, if chemicals are mixed, they produce periodic photonic spikes and at a regular time period. And the spikes can be sensed because they have ultra weak nature. They can be sensed by photo amplifying equipment, also very sensitive equipment. And more or less, assumption is that if chemicals are consumed, then this reaction should stop and the spiking effect should also stop. But observation was that exactly at this place where this chemical process takes place, the spiking effect was, let's say, continuing between 2 and 5 days after finishing of the main reaction. Authors expressed the idea that this chemical process generates the phantom effect, and this effect still persists a couple of days after ending of this generating process, persist in this place and can be measured in optical way. And here we again see a method of perceiving the phantom not in electrochemical way like I mentioned before, but also in optical way. We also performed multiple attempts for electromagnetic measuring the phantoms. One of these attempts has the following form. We use EGA-1 device. This equipment is quite sensitive for electrostatic charge, sensitive for standing waves in the room, in fact created by, for instance, 50 Hz emission. And what we done, we first, and this device in fact should be moved over the place, and if there is any electromagnetic anomaly, reading of this device are increasing. So in fact, moving over the place, we see kind of this spatial anomaly. And what we have done, first we find a position without any anomalies, we scan it multiple times, so it was flat spectra. And then we installed this optical emission device, switch on it for a couple of hours and perform this continuous, so 1 time per 30 minutes, so scan. And every time we see increasing anomaly readings over that place. And then we switch off this device and remove them, so it was empty place. We tried to remove electrostatic charge. We tried to remove, to put even some grounding like a Faraday grid on this position. But nevertheless, we still observed in this place a kind of anomaly readings and after a while it disappears. So it's a typical behavior for the phantom. People who also experiment with this device and with the phantom effect, they created more sophisticated experiment. They use a large room, and in one random position of this room, they switch on this kind of generators. They work it for a while, and then they remove them. So the phantom exists somewhere in the place, but the organizer, they do not tell other people where is this position and ask them to find it. So the people who perform this the real measurement in the place, they didn't know the real position, and they expressed a series of hypotheses about real position of this phantom, and finally the position of the generator and estimated position of phantom then coincide in, I don't know, a couple of centimeters. Yeah, so fast exact this position was found. So there are different different ways also for electromagnetic measurement, but like I said, this not only electrochemical, optical, but also electromagnetic way of measuring is well feasible. Here I would like to return again to the shape effect, and because phantoms and shapes, they are closely interconnected. Once again, phantoms, they incorporate a number of optical and electrical properties. They move quite slowly, move on surfaces. And here in case of, for instance, conic structure, exactly in this position, we will observe amplification because phantom moves from all directions. And we also know that phantoms, they interact with almost all biochemical, mechanical, electrochemical processes. For instance, here, as again, they change the sedimentation rate. Here in this setup, if we measure electrochemical properties of both fluids, there's a pure water here, and here we see absolutely different electrochemical properties. We know that phantoms intensively interact with biochemistry. This paper appeared a few days ago in Nature. About influence of geometrical structure and protein properties. It seems phantoms, they in a very weak way interact with almost all processes. And here one of the main ideas in regard of the shape effect, that using geometries we can control development of phantom structures. We can direct in the specific way. We can even drive them, for instance, if we put here a wire, we can drive the phantoms through this wire. And by using this structure, we can really control the movement and properties of phantoms. And here, if we put here, for instance, any of these detectors, whether electrochemical, optical, or electromagnetic, or something else, we can in this way generate a closed loop technological device that integrate the phantom effect. On this and the next slide, I will try to explain and to demonstrate our attempt to create a hybrid phantom technology device. But first, the question is, why do we need to develop this kind of devices? Why do we need to integrate the phantom in the technology? And the question is quite obvious, because we don't know anything about the phantom world. We don't know whether it's a dark matter, dark energy, or quantum phenomena, or this is something what we even don't know yet. Yeah, but if we integrate this, let's say, unknown in the known technology, we can explore it in more useful and more systematic way. We can, for instance, explore some unknown properties, and we can, create some specific experimentation. And one thing what we even know now, in this setup, we can easily explore quantum phenomena in macroscopic systems. So we performed already probably more than 1,000 experiments with different groups for exploring properties of quantum entanglement in macroscopic system. So this phantom structure can be extremely useful for the bridge between conventional sites and unconventional sites. What is the idea of this development? We used optical generators to create the phantom effect, and this conic structure to drive it through this waveguide to a kind of emitter. And emitter was focused on sensor placed over this wall. Sensor was in the isolating containers, and we are measuring in this experiment temperature, electromagnetic emission, magnetic fields, and main sensor are electrochemical sensors. So if the generator is switched on, the sensor react like here shown in the picture. So here is a background recording. This normally is a kind of flat behavior. If the generator is on, we see a change of a trend. So it's quite typical for electrochemical sensors, and we can express a number, the degree of perturbation from initial trend. If, for instance, there is no waveguide, sensor do not react. And in this time, on and off time, we see exactly the same trend in electrochemical sensors. So the whole setup was done in the following way. A couple of days, the generator was switched on and off once per 2-3 hours. So in one day, we had about 10 to 12 iterations of the same experiments, and then calculated average value. So if there is no waveguide, values are 0. So in each turning on and off of this generator, we do not receive any response from the sensors placed over the wall. Then we installed this waveguide, and we tested two different structures. First, it was PLA as a kind of polymer used for 3D printing. It's quite flexible. And then we used steel. So in fact, we do not see any essential differences between metal and polymer. And it to some extent confirms the idea that phantom is moving over the surface. It's not in the material, but over the surface of the material. So in fact, properties of this material do not play any essential role. And then what we have done, we after 3 days of experimentation, we removed a waveguide. So we removed the structure, and then our expectation was we will not see any effect. Like it should be like here, we should see 0. But what we finally observed, there was a decreasing values, and I repeat again, this is not a single point. There is a series between 10 to 12 measurements as over the whole day. And all this measurement was slowly decreasing, and exactly exponentially decreasing. And about 3 days after, they return again to 0. And what we see here, we see exactly as the first, and this time we observe a generation of phantom structure, and this phantom structure exactly repeats the structure of this waveguide. And if we, after this, we return, as remove this waveguide, the phantom structure is still there. And it still participates in the experiment, and it's guiding the signal from the generator to the sensors. But because this structure is slowly disappearing, we see this exponential decreasing of the signal. Now I would like to summarize what we have achieved in this experiment. So we used this optical generator to generate the phantom effect, and we had 3 days for generation this spatial memory here in this position. So after we removed this physical structure, we received a hybrid device. So this we have a physical generator and physical sensors, but we had a phantom waveguide. And this is very important. This was a functional phantom. It's still working in this system. And now by using this setup, we can explore different properties. We can make a lot of different experiments. For example, here we calculated this generation and disappearing time, so dissociation time of phantom structure. But if the idea is understood, the setup can be explored and extended in any possible way. So we are still working in this direction. But because this presentation time is limited, we need to stop this second point and to proceed to the next topic of the presentation related to the programmable phantom effect. Development of hybrid devices represent purely engineering approach. As engineers, we really like working with hardware, with different sensors, to solder something, to calculate some elements. But here, as we know from introductory part, the phantom effect can be created purely by human consciousness without any technologies. And probably here we meet very alternative approach for technological development without any technologies. Only using human mind, we can develop a kind of technology, let's call it subtle technology. They can still interact with human body, with different systems from human body, with biochemistry, for instance. And this represents really alternative point of view on social, cultural development, and we know this even from very old cultures. So from this point of view, we are really extremely interested in exploring this side of the phantom effect, and because a human operator program it, we call this side a programmable phantom effect. The general question is whether human person, human operator can interfere with physical experiment and can influence its outcome. And modern science answered this question positively. Yes, the operator can do this. And one of the famous experiment toward this question is this double slit experiment, when electromagnetic emission demonstrate either wave-like or corpuscular-like properties. If there is no observation, no measurements, then we see waves. But if operator or person observe it, or there is a measurement performed, then we see only 2 strips on the screen. There is even a nice variation of this experiment done by Dean Radin about, I think, 10 years ago, where the person was sitting about 2 meters away from the experiment and was mentally concentrating on this pattern. And based on the mental effort, here the intensity of emission in this black area was slowly changing. So it seems that human person can even influence on the distribution wave-like or corpuscular-like. But this is not only a single type of experiment. There are other experiments. I would like to refer to one last paper of Vladimir Kernbach. It was recently published. This is about exploration of properties of aqueous solution. And Vladimir introduced two different control samples. So normally experiment is successful if there is a difference between experiment and control. And he introduced two kinds of control. The first one was obvious to experimentator. So he know about this. And there was a second type of control samples, hidden control, and nobody know about this. So here is the point is that human experimentator has a specific expectation about this difference, and indeed in all experiment there is a difference between experiment and control, so it seems that the experiment was positive. Yeah. But hidden control do not demonstrate any significance with the experiment. So, and this was not a single measurement, there was multiple measurements for each case, and there were multiple cases as well. So it's a specific repeatability. It means the human expectation can program more or less this whatever phantom is in this experimental area, and this in turn influence the outcome of this experiment. So between experimentator, this effect is quite well known. We call it normally effect of critical observer. So to conclude, yes, human, this is a common point of view. Yes, human experimentator, human person, human operator can influence, can interfere with physical experiments. We analyzed literature. So first of all, Russian literature in 80s and 90s, so in the Soviet Union time. Whether operator tried purposefully program the phantom, also really to achieve very specific functionality and specific behavior. We find indeed a number of publications. I will not go in any details. But for instance, in some of this publication, people tried to move this platform, the program, the phantom, to move this object on the water surface. Or for instance, there was a specific experiment to program reaction of plant object, of biological object, so in again in very programmable way. At least there are multiple described papers about purposeful programming of these phantoms. And finally, we decided, well, to replicate some of that experiments. In our setup, we had one object, and human operator focused his attention on this object and try to some extent really program it to imagine a specific functionality or specific behavior. And in our case, it was quite simple. There was a low power LED, and if LED was lightning, then this object, this phantom, should make influence on sensors. So, and sensors normally they react, they slowly change, as normally as all these electrochemical sensors, they change the strength. And if this influence was away, then it's returned again to the previous strength. So it was quite easily to detect. And as a control attempt to see whether really this effect, so this object influence, we put setup without any object. And if this LED was lighting, so it's really low power, it's almost not really even visible light from this LED. So there was no influence on sensors. And in turn, again, if the object was present but was no light, then again was no influence on the sensors. So this change appears only if there was light and the object was programmed. So what we observed in these experiments, there was a series of, let's say, different experiments with slightly different conditions. We observed that it works quite well in the first, let's say, 1, 2, and totally up to 7, 8, up to 10 iterations. So these changes are still visible, and then effect disappeared. Then whatever, how much LED was lighting, there was no visible effect. We are, of course, very curious and very much motivated to do this kind of experiments, and performed multiple iterations, and that is one of the latest replication of our own experiments. Here we had this programmable phantom object in one of these thermo-insulating boxes with LED. And sensors are placed here and here. So if this LED was lightning, there was no influence on the sensor because of even insulation and space. And finally, if this object, this LED was on, we had this reaction and sensors. And in fact, both we tested here distance, also we tested, also we tried to increase this distance. It's worked quite well up to specific distance, more or less. And these are typical reactions. Here it is a time of LED lighting, and even, like I said, we observed always up to, well, it's depends, always different, 5, 6, up to 10 probably activation cycles, and after this the effect disappeared. We improved this experiment. Operator is entering in the room and program this object again. And we observed then again and again this up to 10 activation cycles, then programming this again, and again this up to 10 activation cycles. So in this case, we tried to increase the lifetime of this programmable object. It's one of the ideas. And we had one interesting discovery that in fact the lifespan, the lifetime of programmable object do not depend on our time. So for instance, if this one cycle of activation has only 1 hour here, so totally we would have about 10 hours of lifetime. But if this activation time is 1 day, then this lifespan is about 10 days of this phantom object. So here we have a lot of even philosophical equations. The question is, why do we do this? And the answer is because here we program a kind of implant. Because we create a system that can sense a specific situation in real world and can interfere with real world. So in other terminology, we call it sometimes a kind of subtle robot. So we are from robotic field, so it's for us natural to perform some robotic experiments, and we observe this as a kind of autonomous device which can run a specific program. And one of this application is, of course, implant, for instance, the human body. And we explore, in fact, this implant way with this experimental setup. I would like to demonstrate one attempt of scientific investigation of this mental or phantom implants. This attempt was undertaken inside of the mainstream science. That is important. And original technique is coming from tantric Buddhism. There is 6 yoga of Naropa with a final goal of achieving immortality. This goal is divided into different steps, and in the first step the goal is to generate inside of a human body a specific energetic engine that should produce enough energy for all of the steps, and this goal is achieved by putting specific implants in specific places, by concentration, by meditation. So this quite a complex procedure. The interesting side effect of this approach is also, first of all, dramatic increasing of energetic output from human body, and in particular temperature. And this is important. There is a core temperature. It's not a skin effect. There's really an increasing of temperature inside of a human body, and therefore this effect is really quite well measurable. In Western, this approach became very popular. There is a lot of YouTube video demonstrating people sitting in the snow and so in very cold situations. And I would like to refer to one paper, this published in PLOS ONE by Maria Koženíková and co-authors, and this exactly explore this first step, yoga tuma. In this approach, implant installed in this position, and the way of operating with implant is a specific visualization. It is important to visualize the symbols. It is important to visualize exactly the way how it's, the symbols appear. From scientific point of view, the authors investigated two phases. In the first phase, there was no visualization. These practitioners, monks, who demonstrated this approach, perform increasing of temperature by concentration, by specific psychosomatic mechanism, and we see here just really impressive increasing over 37 degrees of Celsius. But after this, this monk, she switched on this implant with this visualization, and we see that temperature increased over 38 degrees of Celsius. This is absolutely stress situation for the organism, and it seems how heavily the implant can influence thermoregulation, metabolic, and immune systems inside of the human body. Another really impressive experiment is shown here. So again, monk, she demonstrate these techniques first based on concentration, mental concentration using this psychosomatic mechanism, and this you see this about 10 minutes. So she become tired, and then stopped performing these exercises, and you see in the relaxation phase the temperature dropped down, and we see more or less comfortable about 36 degrees. Then next attempt, again increasing of temperature, again relaxation, then attempt was stopped. In the second experiment, in the same situation, there's a first the mental concentration, and then in the relaxation, because person here started, that's relaxation, but the person turned on the implant with visualization, and we see a much more higher increasing of temperature, but the most important for much longer time. So here almost over 30 minutes. And it's demonstrate this autonomous work of this implant. I should say this yoga tuma is not not a single technique that use these implants. We know much more approaches which, for instance, involve these implants in the third A and much more. So in general, this approach seems to be very promising for scientific investigation. So time is out. At least I tried to demonstrate in this presentation all important points. So first of all, different appearances of the phantom effect to demonstrate more engineering point of view for development of hybrid devices, and more operator-related points for programmable phantoms. I would like to conclude here with several points. So first of all, what we are absolutely convinced that the phantom effect has a physical manifestation and is really well measurable by different instrumentation. We think that there are two really important properties. So one property is spatial localization, because exactly because of these properties we can develop the hybrid devices and bind them to a specific position inside of our technology. And the second property is the programmability of the phantom effect. And implants, or generally these programmable phantoms, it seems a very important concept for achieving immortality. And this is especially important. I learned that we should say active immortality, because there is a kind of passive immortality as well. And this active immortality that was described in all old cultures like Buddhism, Daoism, and even more older cultures. And we should really take it seriously. Because in modern science and modern society, we turn again to this idea of immortality and start to look to achieve this. Well, here this presentation is finished. Many thanks for your attention.